Sammy,
Yes.
you're looking well.
Thank you. You're looking well too.
Well, now where are you, buddy?
I'm in Toronto, so
Sure.
I know the I know the Harold Ballard story. It's funny because
Oh,
my dad and my mom are from Egypt, so they immigrated here to Canada, like most
sure.
Canadians. And so my dad worked at the Toronto Stock Exchange, and so he would get tickets, random tickets from other traders who had season tickets for the Leafs. But
Okay.
he didn't know anything about hockey, and they would obviously only give him like when terrible teams were coming to town, right? Like you wouldn't get like Wayne Gretzky or something like that. And so
Right.
he'd always say, "Do you want to go downtown and like go see a game?" I'm like, "Let's go!" And we didn't know what icing was. Like we didn't know like we barely know what a Rick Vive is. Like nothing.
Well, I
Just
think at that time, I don't think a lot of the Leafs knew any of the rules either. So
we fit in, right? Like I'm like, yeah,
mass confusion. Mass confusion.
mass confusion.
Uh,
It was just a great excuse to get a hot dog, right?
sure. A
Mhm.
nice overpriced stale bun hot dog down at the old 60
Yeah,
Chrome.
chip your teeth a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yep.
Mhm.
Well, this is fun, Sammy. Whatever you need from me, I'm at the ready, my friend.
Yo, welcome to My Summer Lair. I'm your host, Sammy. If I was a hockey goalie, I'd be such a sieve that I could make perfect spaghetti. Younan. Jason Priestley's pandemic project, Offside, the Harold Ballard Story, is streaming on CBC Gem. It had its world premiere at the Whistler Film Festival back in December 2022. And yes, I said Jason Priestley, as in, Beverly Hills 90210, and the guy who directed that video for the Bare Naked Ladies, The Old Apartment. Excellent, excellent tune. Priestley's documentary focuses on Harold Ballard, who was the principal owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs from 1972 until his death in 1990. And, well, basically, Ballard was a Canadian Donald Sterling, who drove the original 6 hockey team into the ground. He fired 13 coaches and 6 general managers during his reign. He was misogynistic, homophobic, and racist, and that was all on the record as well, though many of his comments aligned with, past societal values. I find documentaries like this are great because they reveal how far we've come while underscoring many of the common values we hold today will end up being super cringy to future generations. Thankfully, we're all gonna be dead. So yeah, those are the basic beats of Harold Ballard, but who was he, really? This is what Priestley smoothly unpacks in this decidedly un-Canadian Heritage Minute. My guest is one of the documentary's executive producers, Chuck Tatham. Chuck Tatham has been a producer and a writer on Arrested Development, Modern Family, How I Met Your Mother, a whole bunch of sitcoms you've seen and enjoyed. His big break was writing on the last 3 seasons of Full House. Like, back in the day, you got a dude, Full House. He is a hockey fan and a guy who plays hockey, so we do talk about the Leafs, who won their last championship in 1967. Their 50-plus year drought between championships is currently the longest in the NHL. Do you believe in the Ballard curse? We also talk about writing for TV and being a Canadian who lives in LA. Some of the names you're about to hear are, you have to be ready for this. Ready? David Letterman, Will Arnett, Mike Myers, Keanu Reeves, Matthew Perry, Jerry Bruckheimer. Jerry Bruckheimer, yo! I mentioned this briefly at the top, but my dad and I went to a handful of Ballard Leafs games. I remember Rick Vive. Thought he was a cool and good player. He's in this doc, and it was kind of nice to see him. For my dad and I, going to Leafs games during the Ballard years was this strange introduction to Canadian culture, especially in the late 80s and early 90s. We didn't fit in. We didn't understand the culture. I'm not even sure if the culture understood us either, so maybe it was all mutual. As an immigrant, my dad was a soccer fan, and I eventually moved on to the NBA, captivated by Michael Jeffrey Jordan. Still, let's return to this unsettling time in Toronto's history with this unusual sports documentary. This is about a sports team that never won. We typically don't make docs about losers, and yet here we are with Offside, the Harold Ballard Story.
Sound, the final frontier. My Summer Lair is an enterprise, a pop culture voyage with a continuing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new creators and celebrate established producers, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now here is your host, Sammy Younan.
But I'm going to get right into it, talking about the myth and the legend of Harold Ballard in all of its crusty glory.
Great.
There's a striking montage in the first 5 minutes of the documentary, Offside, the Harold Ballard Story, where notable individuals are trying to sum up this, like, Leafs owner in one word. What is your one word to sum up Harold Ballard?
Sammy.
Yeah.
I think megalomaniac. It's a big word, but he was a megalomaniac. He thought he had all power. He wasn't happy unless he had all power. And at the risk of embellishing my single word, he didn't care what happened. He didn't care about the consequences of his behavior, as long as he had A, publicity, and B, money. So a megalomaniac, 2 words, three words, 4 words, a very, very needy megalomaniac.
Okay, there you go. That is a great way to put it. It's interesting because in sports, there's always that hierarchy where, like, if a team's doing badly, you might blame the goalie or maybe the star player, or the captain. If it's kind of going on for a little bit of longer time, then the coach gets thrown under the bus or the GM. And it's rare that like you get to the level where it escalates, like a call or whatever, right? You go to the manager, you go right to the top, right? And it's like you start throwing the owner under the bus. That's rare when the owner starts getting like.
It is, except when the hockey community saw the cavalcade of coaches, some very competent coaches, guys like Roger Nielsen and Dan Maloney, who got fired. Ballard, I think, fired 13 coaches, but and you sort of lose track because some guys got fired twice, and the team, if you're a George Steinbrenner and you're an obnoxious rich jerk, but you get the Yankees the World Series, then you're forgiven. You're doing whatever it takes to win it all.
Winning covers a lot of sins.
It does. It covers a lot of sins, and you put up with this obnoxious behavior. If the Leafs had won, we wouldn't be so bitter about Ballard. But the idea that someone was both incompetent and money and super greedy, and the team stunk, that was why Ballard. That's why Ballard is held up as possibly one of the worst team owners in professional sports history.
Yeah, that montage that I mentioned, where people are just listing all these different individual words. The final word in that montage is enigma, and I think that's like. Is that what kind of drew you and director, I guess, Jason Priestley, to this documentary subject?
That's a very good question, my friend. He was kind of an enigma in that, on the face of it, he was this buffoon, this big public clown. But as I researched this and we did the film, it became obvious he was a kind of a needy, insecure guy. He had his wife until she died. He had his friend Stafford Smythe until he died. He had his friend, King Clancy, till he died. And he had Yolanda McMillan, his girlfriend, until Ballard died. And so he was an enigma in that he seemed to be powerful and confident and brash. But you scratch the surface a little bit, and this is a very insecure man. He was an extraordinarily insecure man. And he may have been insecure, he wouldn't admit it, about the fact he knew nothing about hockey. He knew next to nothing about hockey. So you had a guy who had to pretend. It was a little bit like Trump being president. You had a guy who had to pretend to know what he was doing, and was so full of confidence that his every word, his every deed suggested, I know what I'm doing, at least to himself. But the public could see he had no idea. Ballard had no idea what he was doing. And but the building was full. The tickets were all sold. He didn't care. The cash register is ringing.
The parallel to Trump as well is that, like, Ballard moved into the building. He lived above Maple Leaf Gardens, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's that lazy kind of billionaire, millionaire kind of guy.
A fat guy walking around in his building. And when you hear the players talking about seeing him in his bathrobe or sitting in the back, during a practice eating a bowl of ice cream, it was like, is this guy for real? Because remember, there were the 7 guys that sort of took over the team from Conn Smythe, the team founder, and then it was down to 3. It was down to John Bassett and Stafford Smythe and Harold Ballard. Then they bought out Bassett, and then Stafford died. So the team was kind of dropped in Ballard's lap. And it's a bit of a be careful what you wish for, because now he controlled the Toronto Maple Leafs by, I think it was 70, 71 or whatever. And he didn't know what he was doing. He would never admit it, but he had no idea what he was doing. And the team, because they won the cup, the last cup was in '67. And since then they've had some good teams, but until he died in 1990, the team was 10 consecutive losing seasons from 79 to 89. That's not easy to do, Sammy. It's not easy to be that bad that consistently, but they pulled it off. So.
Yeah, it's impressive, right? You can be impressive
It
the
was
other
pretty
way.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yes. It was depressive. Yeah.
Depressive. There you go. That shit should been instead of "We the North" for like what the Raptors have for the slogan, like "We're depressive."
Oh yes, yeah. There should have been "We want a refund." That should have been the Leafs slogan.
And I mean, are you sure you guys got the right footage for that apartment that he had above Maple Leaf Gardens? It looked like a true crime scene, like somebody got murdered there.
It was really sad, and everybody was very curious. Will we find some footage of this place where Ballard lived? Because he's a multimillionaire.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was sumptuous. Maybe it was this cool little, 4-bedroom thing. But no, it's this little hall into a windowless room. But I think he felt very safe at Maple Leaf Gardens. That was his little kingdom, and that was the 60 Carlton Street was his little castle, and he could do what he wants. It was just weird. The more we found out about the fact that he had a lovely house and lots of money, but he preferred to live, above the Zamboni. Just weird.
Yeah, I mean, the Zamboni can sometimes be a little bit fun, right? So, like, I'm sure he might. Maybe he drove it around at night or something when nobody was looking.
Maybe he drove around. There was evidence to suggest that the fumes from the Zamboni may have affected his mind, but the place needed better ventilation.
That might be something else exploring if there's like a follow-up documentary to this.
Yes. Yeah.
Was you, as a kid from Ontario, was there any trash talking with director Jason Priestley, who grew up obviously a Vancouver Canucks fan? Was there...
Well,
and they've obviously never won a cup, right?
They've never won a cup, but I will admit, interestingly, I'm a Montreal fan. I was raised in Southern Ontario, but the Leafs were so bad that as a kid, my brother was 4 years my senior. He said, he's a Montreal fan. I said, why? I said, well, when's the last time that the Leafs won the cup? I was like, oh yeah, Montreal wins it every year. So I'm a Montreal fan. As far as trash talk between Vancouver and Montreal, you just have nothing but sympathy for the good people of Vancouver. I mean, they were close, as you recall. They've been close a few times, but in '94 against the Rangers, but Messier, as you recall, was unstoppable. But
yeah.
Jason, it was great to have a supremely talented guy like Jason to direct and to produce and to narrate. He was a great interviewer. He got a lot out of, sitting down with Wendell and Daryl and Lanny and Tiger and a lot of media people. My perspective as far as researching this was I was raised 52 minutes away from Maple Leaf Gardens in Guelph. So I knew the shit show that was going on. And I knew that every time mom and dad opened the newspaper, Ballard was on the front page. Just a weird, and I kind of assumed, because my dad, my dad said the Leafs used to be good, and I didn't believe him, because when I was a kid, they just stunk. Said,
yeah.
We won the cup 13 times. What?
Yeah.
What, are you kidding me, Dad? And so now that they're good again, even though I'm a Montreal fan, I really love for the Leafs to win the cup. I would just love it, because so many of our friends and neighbors would be over the moon, if they finally got out from under this rock. But a great team this year, but you never know. Something always seems to happen.
Yeah. I mean, that's the Ballard curse, right? Like, you kind of revisit that in the documentary, drawing the parallels to the Boston Red Sox.
Yes, it feels like a curse, which is unfortunate. The team is so well managed and so stocked with talent right now. I mean, unfortunately, this season Boston is, and I detest Boston.
Right.
But they're so good this year. And then there are a couple of other teams that are really good, and the Rangers are good, and it's just tough. It's just tough for the Leafs. There's 32 teams or whatever it is. It's just it's tough. So
yeah, I mean, it must have put a lot of pressure too after the Raptors won, because that was kind of unexpected in a way, right? Like, you wouldn't expect like a Canadian hockey place like Toronto.
Well, and I remember when the Blue Jays won it twice. They won the World Series in 92, 93, and my buddy in Chicago was like, we haven't won it since the World War I, and we've been in the league for 15 years. Yeah, we got a couple of World Series. And that drove my buddies in Chicago nuts. And as far as the Raptors are concerned, I mean, that was, yeah. I mean, it sure puts pressure on the Leafs. That was incredible. The team is well managed. They got a great roster. Everything went their way. They had Kawhi Leonard for what, an hour and a half, and he and he was great. You know,
A rental.
pure one of the great sports rentals. Kawhi Leonard.
Yes, that might be another future documentary, like exploring sports
Yes,
rentals.
yes. Rental, sports rental. That's a good idea for a documentary. Let me start typing.
Okay, there you go. Speaking of typing, your first, I guess, major break would be considered Full House.
Yeah. Yeah. My brother Jamie and I were writing. We were both in advertising in Toronto, and I said, "Is your job as bad as mine?" And he said, "Yep." And so we moved to LA,
Mm-hmm.
and we got on Full House 30 years ago. So I would have been what, 6 years old? Anyway, we drove
Like
down
the
there.
Doogie Howser of writing.
You know what? You said it very well. I was a child. I was a young, a little boy, and of course, Full House was a huge hit,
Mm-hmm.
a massive hit. We got there. It was on the Warner Brothers lot, and we did 3 years. We did the last 3 years of Full House, and then my brother came to his senses and went back to Canada. But I was addled, so I stayed in LA until now,
Mm-hmm.
and I stayed at Warner Brothers. I did 2 years on a show called Living Single with Queen Latifah,
Mm-hmm.
a couple years on Suddenly Susan with Brooke Shields, and then I was just off to the races. I've been a very lucky guy.
Arrested Development.
Arrested and
Modern
How I
Family.
Met Your Mother, Modern Family. Yeah, I have been very lucky and met a lot of really nice people. I've got a million stories. I can tell 3 of them. The rest I get sued. No, it's been a nice ride. I was born in Listowel, Ontario,
Mm-hmm.
and raised in Guelph. And it's funny, when I first got down to Hollywood, people would say, "You should go home. You should go home." And I thought it was because they'd read my writing and they thought it was crap, which may have been the case. But the longer I was there, the more I realized they thought I was, I dare say, kind of a nice guy, kind of an innocent guy from Canada, and might not be prepared for all that Hollywood was. But I survived and worked. I've worked every year, and now I'm on a show actually up here called Children Ruin Everything on
Right.
CTV. And I've told my kids, my sons are now adults, but I told them I did not come up with the name of that show.
Mhm.
That was Kurt Smeaton, a very funny, very talented man. He said Children Ruin Everything. I just show up and help
Yeah.
with the scripts a
Yeah.
little bit. So
But the break from Full House, that came from a spec script? Like you wrote a spec script for The Simpsons? You and your brother?
yes,
Do you remember what the premise was?
the premise was so dark that I remember we had a meeting at Paramount, and when the person at Paramount read the script, they canceled the meeting. That's how dark it was. But the guys, Dennis Trenzler and Mark Warren, who ran Full House, read it. It was about the fact that Lisa Simpson had to have her tonsils out,
Mm-hmm.
and before the surgery, Homer deeply offends the surgeon, and he's worried that the surgeon's going to do a bad job. So the night before the surgery, he takes a bottle of scotch. We called it Old Klugman. Takes a bottle of scotch to the surgeon's house to make amends, not knowing the surgeon is a sober alcoholic. So the surgeon shows up completely blasted for Lisa's surgery the next day. And it was a kind of a fun premise, which the guys at Full House enjoyed very much. And I think they may have read a Frasier that we wrote, but I remember in the job interview, because being raised in Canada, as you know, anything over like 12 Celsius is tropical.
Mm-hmm.
And
Shorts
in
weather.
the interview, I said, "Are we allowed to wear shorts?" And they said, "Sure." I said, "We'll work here. You know, I don't care if you whip us and beat us, as long as we can wear shorts." So
Right.
next thing we know, we're on Full House, and it was a top 20 show, I think, on Friday nights, TGIF and et cetera, et cetera. But it was a show that we were too, like I was raised with the Brady Bunch. I knew the Full House was a phenomenon, but I didn't realize, I hadn't seen the show. I knew that there was Bob Saget and Coulier and Stamos and the girls, but it was a lot of fun. I was on the Warner Brothers lot, and we'd see George Clooney playing basketball because he was on ER at the time.
That's right, yeah.
And Friends was cranking up there in the 90s, and the Warner Brothers lot was Drew Carey show. There was a lot going on. It was a lot of fun. A great turkey burger, by the way, Sammy. I don't know if they still have a great turkey burger, but the Warner Brothers lot had one of the great turkey burgers.
This is
Just
going to
so
be
you know.
inspiring for like future Canadian screenwriters and people who want to break into like film and like TV, right? Like the turkey burger
I
is something we don't talk about.
You're very, it's true. A lot of people have not discussed the lure of the turkey burger. I would submit, though, I've said to a lot of young writers, I don't think I ever aspired to work in Hollywood. My brother and I wrote a show in Toronto before we went called Maniac Mansion. It starred Joe
Eugene
Flaherty.
Levy?
The episodes were directed by Eugene Levy, and the head writer was Mike Short, Martin Short's brother,
Mm-hmm.
and he was the guy that said, you guys have got to go, and we said because we stink. He said, well, no, because there are no opportunities here. This is like the only thing that you can do here. There was that, and maybe one or two other scripted comedies, and I liked the idea of going to New York. I wanted to work for Letterman, and he said, no, you want to do scripted television.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can go to New York and try and get on Letterman, but if you want to do scripted comedy, you've got to go to LA. And so even though I think I was reluctant to go to LA, it was pretty obvious when I got here, yeah, this is where I had to be. And but what I'm telling young writers now is, if you can do it up here, do it up here.
Mm-hmm.
Do it up here, because I miss Canada every day I'm in LA. It's just culturally, and LA's got, oh, Sammy, LA's got issues. But
Okay.
I mean,
But an excellent turkey burger on the Warner's lot.
Oh, the Warner Brother turkey burger almost made you forget about the racial tension and the homelessness and the pollution and the shootings and the earthquakes and the floods and the fires and the
that kind of does balance out when you put it that way.
When you think of it, yeah. You got a mouthful of a tasty turkey burger, it makes it all right.
Yes. Were you able to tell the twins apart on Full House?
Oh, Sammy, the old story goes that I couldn't tell Mary-Kate from Ashley, and I asked one of the writers one day, how can you tell which one's Mary-Kate and which one's Ashley? And he said, first, you have to give a shit. And I said, okay. Okay, that's a good point. I don't really care, and nobody else does. But Ashley had a little birthmark just above her lip, and I think we put makeup on it, so they were literally identical.
Mm-hmm.
But they were good kids. I would love to say I had a great relationship with them, but they were very tiny and they were quite quiet. Mm-hmm. And I think to this day, they remain very tiny and quite quiet, but very extraordinarily successful. I mean, I'm delighted for their success in fashion.
Yeah, you got it, dude. So is Jason Priestley on your hockey team in LA? Because I know you have a number of when you guys take on like Jerry Bruckheimer and other guys.
The Bruckheimer is in El Segundo. I have never played hockey with Jason. I hung up the skates, at least temporarily, right before COVID. Mm-hmm. So I did, that league is in Panorama City, which is sort of in the deep part of the San Fernando Valley. I don't want to say it's a bad neighborhood, Sammy, but I wear my equipment to the game. I drive there with the helmet, all the pads on, and have my
The fight starts
ready.
Before the game.
You, if you can get it from the car into the arena without being shot at. You know what's interesting in that league? There are nights where if you saw a white Rolls Royce,
mm-hmm.
I mean that Justin Bieber was playing on the big sheet. We played on the 4-and-4, the littler sheet,
mm-hmm.
but you'd occasionally see. And what kind of, you got to have a lot of money to drive a white Rolls Royce to Panorama City and just leave it in the parking lot. But I guess when you're from where's he from? Stratford, Ontario, the pride of Stratford, that mm-hmm. Justin Bieber can do whatever he wants. So
there you go. Yeah, it's funny because it's like you're saying, like this is like kind of a sketchy area. But it's a number of it's you is Matthew Perry, I think, is on your team.
Back in the day when I got here, Matt Perry was on the team. Kiefer Sutherland was on the team, and everybody was sort of industry. They were actors, mm-hmm. Writers, stuntmen. And what's interesting, Hollywood, it's so hard to get a job that we'd play from 11 to 12:30 and then go out for beers till 2 or whatever on a Monday, because nobody had to get up. Like nobody had to get,
Yeah.
But I remember sitting with my old pal, Matthew Perry, one day, and he really, really, you could tell the desire to succeed. And he was obviously a great looking guy. He was a wonderful person. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he blew up, I never got to know the guy particularly well.
Mm-hmm.
I saw him naked, of course, many times in the locker room, but I didn't get to know him very well. And the fact that he did so well is kind of great. And that was a fun league, that particular league. And I guess I played in that league for about a quarter of a century anyway. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is there any famous actor or producer or whoever it may be that's like turns out it's like a really good hockey player?
Well, Keanu Reeves was a great goaltender. He was a really great goaltender.
That makes sense when you see the John Wick stuff.
Yes, I'm glad he didn't kick me in the head. Yeah. Richard Dean Anderson, the gentleman who played MacGyver, was very, very. Matthew Perry's an incredible athlete. He was a ranked tennis player in Canada as a young man, and no, it was a league where, I mean, the fact that I was in it meant that the skill level wasn't that high. I mean, if you've seen me play, there's no difference in my skating between having the skate guards on and having them off. That's how bad.
Yes.
But which way do you shoot, Chuck? I don't. Neither way.
Yeah.
I don't really shoot either way properly. But sometimes in the handshake line, I'm blanking. Sometimes in the handshake line, you'll see someone, a famous actor or a producer or something like that. Jared Bruckheimer, I played against once, and it was not in a league game. He's a small guy, but his team is stocked with giant guys, so Jerry never gets in trouble. And but that was in El Segundo League down south of the airport. That's where the Kings practice, and that's where all the Kings opponents practice. So you could go there. When my kids were little, they played hockey all the way through grade school and high school. And after their practices, Sammy, you'd go to the other rink, which was 11 feet away, and see the team that was going to play the Kings that night practicing. Wow. So there'd be three of us watching Carey Price and the Canadian. You know, there was a story. My son Nick, my younger, he had a practice one morning, and there was a guy on the ice shooting pucks. And so Nicky went out and came back in and said to his coach, "There's a guy on our ice shooting pucks." And he said, "Well, it's our ice. Tell him to get off." So Nicky went out and said, "Pardon me, sir." And the guy turned around with Sidney Crosby.
Wow.
And Nicky said, "I've been told to tell you got to get off the ice." And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I went over my time." And it was when he was out getting after one of his concussions, and Sidney was training in LA. So Nick tells the story the rest of his life. I kicked Sidney Crosby off a hockey rink.
Yes. Well done. Yeah. And it's interesting too, the Sidney Crosby like apology, like it's a very Canadian stereotype. I know.
Yeah. Apparently, Nick said he looked and sounded like he was very mad at himself for having encroached on the little guy's hockey. And then my elder son Trev played for the LA Junior Kings, and they're both really good hockey players. The hockey community down here in LA is quite advanced. There are teams from LA going up to Flin Flon and Kamloops and kicking butt in tournaments, which is kind of cool.
That is really cool. I bring up the Sidney Crosby apology because I want to circle back to the Harold Ballard documentary because on like Arrested Development, like you and a number of other like prominent Canadians, you played around with Canadian stereotypes throughout the show, right?
Yes.
And like what stood out to me with the Harold Ballard thing was he was very un-Canadian in a sense. He defied the Canadian stereotypes, right? Like there was a kind of cranky middle finger, unapologetic stance to him. It almost like if he was a wrestler, he'd be a heel, which is like Canadian oxymoron.
He would have been a heel, but there was no pushback, right? In the Canadian culture in the 70s and 80s, there's not very much pushback in Canada now when someone is obnoxious. You know, when in the subway in Toronto, someone steps on your foot, you say you're sorry. You know, and that's the Canadian way. So I don't know. Ballard came from money. So we got this. I love the United States and all of its lovely people, but he had a very sort of an American perspective on going about his business. And I think at the time he was so obnoxious and so brash and so unpleasant. I mean, I guess he was fun. Some people thought he was fun. That when people didn't push back, he just kept going. He just kept on being a jerk. And the bigger jerk he was, the more he got in the newspaper. So unfettered, this guy did from 71 to his death in 1990, whatever the hell he wanted. And if it got in the newspaper, he was delighted. It was very, very to your point, very un-Canadian behavior. That was partly offensive and partly just confusing because what the hell, where did this guy come from? He couldn't possibly be from Toronto. Yes, he's from Toronto. Although the rest of Canada might say, yes, if he's obnoxious, he has to have been from Toronto. So,
right. That seems to be like the two Toronto hallmarks, right? Like
exactly.
Ambition and insecurity.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're an obnoxious Canadian, you must be from Toronto. Well, I think Toronto's pretty good. I used to live on Bathurst Street, and I enjoyed my time in Toronto. I was there for the screening of the movie 2 days ago. and it only took about an hour and a half to go 4 blocks. So I'd say Toronto's still getting it done.
Yeah.
With construction and jaywalking and traffic.
Yeah. Speaking of Toronto, then, like, you mentioned, like, the LA scene in terms of hockey, and there's an enthusiasm and a passion. Like, even in the documentary touches upon this, like, the team continues to lose, but the seats are filled, and people are still going to games, and the ratings are still high, and, like...
Yes.
How do you explain a rock-bottom team with, like a loyal fan base? Basically, how do you explain Mike Myers? That's really what I'm asking. Like,
well, that's the thing, because Mike is my age, and I think Mike's from Scarborough, in the East End, Toronto. It was kind of the only, it was one of the only things to do. I mean, with all due respect to the culture of Toronto in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, there were no Blue Jays until 77. There were no Raptors at all during Ballard's life. And hockey is an institution. It was a little bit like going to church.
Yeah.
I mean, the Leafs, Saturday night, you had to watch the Leafs. And if you were lucky enough to get in the building, whether you were given the tickets or you somehow found the money for the tickets, you'd go, and they would lose, 11-2 to St. Louis, and you had a good time. But you got in the building because you were a little kid to go into that building. And once in a while, we had good seats down near the ice. We were often up in the grays in the very, very back. But just to be in the building was and it was very quiet, Sammy.
Yeah.
Unlike rinks today, where there's that sort of that buzz and that roar in a hockey rink. No, it was very, very, very quiet at Maple Leaf Gardens. And I remember a dear old friend of mine had seats directly behind the Leafs bench for a game once, and directly behind him, Boris Salming jumped on, dropped his stick, and grabbed a guy and got a penalty. And he was on the ice for 3 seconds. He went to the box. The other team scored immediately. So between the time he jumped on and was skating back to the ice silently was about 10 seconds. And I yelled, "Nice shift, Boria." And he looked up and said, "Fuck yourself." And I said, "Oh my gosh, I was acknowledged by Boris Salming."
Memories.
So, oh my gosh. I thought, and everyone around me was, "Hey man, Boris Salming told you to fuck yourself." It was pretty cool. Yeah.
That should be like a Canadian Heritage Minute.
The time the great Boris Salming. For me, I was such a jackass, like a little jackass yelling something stupid I was actually one game at Maple Leaf Gardens. Alan Bester was a goaltender for the Leafs in the 80s, I think, and a pretty good goalie, but he had some off nights. And I was there. He was doing poorly enough that I was actually yelling some things, I will admit. And the usherette came up to me and whispered to me, "You're sitting beside his wife." So I quieted down a little. The abuse, I dialed it back slightly insofar I was sitting 6 inches from the goaltender's wife.
Yeah. So that's good then. It sounds like the Leaf stinkiness sharpened your comedy chops and your sarcasm.
I never thought of it, Sammy. That the terrible, terrible Leafs of my childhood were how I got a career. Thanks very much, Harold Ballard, for laying the groundwork, because you could not go to a Leafs game without being sarcastic, acerbic, bitter, and just openly obnoxious. At least I was.
Right. That should be on your business card. So
yes,
when the Leafs obviously participated a little bit in this documentary, and I'm sure they've seen it, like, are they kind of happy or unhappy, or how do they view this part in their history? Obviously, you can't erase this part of their history, but how do they kind of view it?
From what I gather, they're very happy with the documentary. They saw the documentary. They were part of the process. And they're aware that the Leafs were very good before Ballard, and the Leafs are very good now. And to your point, they're also aware that there was a period of time when this boob ran the team, and that's history. But that is a part of the team's history. I don't think anybody in the current Leafs believes in a curse. I think they justifiably believe they're going to win the cup this year and every year thereafter. But we were not surprised to find out that the Leafs were happy with the film. And I was delighted because, we frankly, at no point do we disparage the Leafs. The Leafs are a great, proud organization and always will be. They just had a jerk driving the bus for 18 years. And, by 93, he died in 90. By 93, they were in the semis, remember, against Gretzky. And of course, Gretzky put out the Leafs, and I'm trying to remember who beat the Kings for the cup. Oh, that's right, my beloved Montreal Canadiens.
Yes, there you go.
It's only been 30 years since the Habs hoisted the hardware. We're on a roll.
How does a script guy, like, as we kind of touched upon some of your work with Arrested Development, Modern Family, Full House, how does a script guy end up in a documentary?
That's a very good question. Michael Geddes The guy, it was his idea, Lone Wolf Productions. He's originally from London. He's working in Toronto. It's a very accomplished producer. He came to me in LA one day and said, Chuck, there's never been a Ballard movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, that's weird. This guy was probably the most famous Canadian personality for about 20 years there. I can't believe that nobody's ever done it. He said nobody's ever done it. So I wrote a screenplay sort of in the vein of The Big Short, a very non-narrative, weird, talk to the camera sort of a thing. And the CBC got their mitts on it and said, well, first things first, this actually feels like we should do a documentary. And Mike and I, because I've never done a documentary to your point, but it kind of made sense because Ballard was so crazy, such a clown. If I was going to dip my toe into the documentary world, it would be doing something like a character like this. I'm probably not going to do the Charles de Gaulle retrospective. That's not really in my lane.
Yeah.
So while I enjoy, I tell people I enjoy writing fiction, but Ballard's life was crazier than any fiction. I mean, the more I researched this guy. And took a couple of years of reading and interviewing all the players, and I enjoyed doing it very much. We're going to try and do a closed-end, 4-part sort of fictionalized series about Ballard. We're out there trying to sell it right now.
Mm-hmm.
In that, it's a great documentary called The Staircase that led to HBO making a short series about it with some conjecture and some heightened things and some stylized things, and that's what we want to do with Ballard. The next step would be maybe a 4-part scripted series about the craziness of this time. We did as much as we could in 89 minutes, but there's a lot of other stuff to be mined in Ballard's time.
A great example that's in the documentary of like why you almost needed to have the documentary before the fictional thing, because people wouldn't believe it if you put in the fictional, your Big Short version, which is like Harold Ballard didn't just hire his boat mechanic to be the trainer for the Leafs, but when the players were like injured or not feeling well, he gave them Neocitrin.
Neocitrin, yes.
Like that's one of those facts. Like in real life, where like if you tried to put that in your fictional thing, you would think it's an exaggeration or you're like a funny guy or whatever, right? But
like Guy Kinnear was the trainer, and he was Harold Ballard's boat mechanic in Muskoka. And you're right. If a guy came to the bench and said, I think I separated my shoulder, Neocitrin. Really? I think my jaw is broken. Well, can you open your mouth enough for some Neocitrin?
Yes.
Yeah, very weird.
Yeah.
Very weird stuff.
Is it going to be difficult to cast Harold Ballard for your fictional version?
Well, I don't know if I'd love to get Will Arnett. Will's an old friend from Arrested, and he is a huge Leafs fan. I almost said Habs. He'd slap me.
Yeah.
We have Nick Offerman has the script.
He'd be good too. Yeah, he could do Surly.
Yeah, he'd be good. Yeah, but you need a big personality. Mike Myers would be great. Biggest Leafs fan in the world with Will Arnett. He'd be great.
Yeah, no, that would work. Yeah, and they know the story and they know the character.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I know we've talked to Dan Aykroyd, who's obviously legendary and fantastic and supremely talented. So it would be hard to cast, but if you had somebody that went at it, who dove in with both feet, like these actors do. And the movie, the screenplay, the way we have it, is narrated by Ballard's deceased wife, Dorothy. So it has a sort of an interesting perspective. Sort of someone with the 20,000 feet up looking down at all the weirdness, because she was an extraordinarily patient woman who died of cancer in the late 60s, but she was there for the formative years of just when Ballard started to go bananas. And the way it's written, the screenplay, she continues to narrate even after she's dead. There's actually an argument between her and another narrator in the middle of the film who says, "You're dead, you shouldn't be narrating," and she basically says, "Fuck off. I barely got to speak when Ballard was around. Let me speak now." So we have a for the second half of the screenplay, the narrator is actually deceased, which I think is kind of fun.
That is fun. Hopefully you and I can reconnect like when that comes out. But for now, Offside, the Harold Ballard story. By the time this airs, it'll be streaming on CBC Gem, but it's going to be on CBC, like actually on TV on January 22nd.
Yep. That's at 8 o'clock Sunday night. By that time, the Cowboys will be blowing out the 49ers. So there's no reason to have watched the end of that football game on Sunday night. But thank you, Sammy. Everybody enjoy the Offside, the Harold Ballard Story on Gem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pleased as punch to have been a part of it and delighted to have spent time with you, my friend.
Thank you so much, Chuck. And I eagerly wait for this fictional version of the Harold Ballard Story.
Oh, we're getting it done. We're getting it done. You may wind up playing Guy Kinnear, the boat mechanic.
Oh, my one line is, here's some Neocitrin.
Okay, you just landed the role.
That was an easy audition. Done. I can even bring my own Neocitrin too.
Please do.
Yeah.
We don't have money for props. Bring your own.
Like a method actor, right? Bringing my own Neocitrin.
Yes. Well, thanks so much, Sammy.
Yo, that was producer Chuck Tatham. The documentary is Offside, the Harold Ballard Story. It's directed and narrated by Jason Priestley, and you can see it on CBC Gem. I am the host of My Summer Lair. I'm Sammy. There's a phrase I used in this episode: winning covers a lot of sins. And it does. But losing also reveals all the sins. It goes both ways. We do this weird thing now where we feel bizarrely obligated to categorize and slot people. They're good people or they're bad people. As if real life is a comic book for children. Spider-Man is the good guy, the Green Goblin is the bad guy. But in real life, those categories of good and bad are just so cheesy. They're really a ready-made commentary on the judge issuing the flimsy verdict, and most importantly, they fail because they lack all nuance. With the extreme exception of serial killers, most people aren't all good or all bad. Sometimes good people just do bad things. Sometimes bad people do good things. I'm grateful this documentary was nuanced. I started this conversation with Chuck, talking about the fascinating montage in the first 5 minutes of the documentary, Offside, the Harold Ballard Story, where notable individuals were asked to sum up the Leafs owner, Harold Ballard, in one word. Some of the words in that montage were entitled bombastic and misunderstood. There's not necessarily a clear consensus on who Harold Ballard was. Sports is clear. You're either a winner or you're a loser. For many seasons, thanks to Harold Ballard's inept ownership and total lack of leadership, the Toronto Maple Leafs were a terrible NHL team. They flat out sucked. And that's what makes sports so beautiful. That clarity we don't get in real life. Winner or loser is clear in the games we play, yet so murky in the game of life. One of my favorite Jay-Z lines kept coming up in my head as I watched this Harold Ballard documentary. I'm going to quote Jay-Z right now. Dark night feeling, die and be a hero, or live long enough to see yourself become a villain. I went from the favorite to the most hated. But would you rather be underpaid or overrated? Moral victories is for minor league coaches. As surreal as it is, you can put those Jay-Z lines on Harold Ballard's tombstone. Check out Offside, the Harold Ballard Story, even if you're not a hockey fan. I'm not a hockey fan, and yet it was so compelling. And now, a My Summer Lair PSA.
If you enjoyed this conversation, some good news. My pal Sammy newsletter. Let us extend the conversation. And I know. You think of email and you think of negative connotations. You think of work. You think of that sweet senior citizen in your life who keeps forwarding those weird chain letters things so that they welcome good luck. All of that is true. All of that is email. That's because for those people and those emails, the E in email stands for electronic mail. So what if? What if the E stood for experience? What if it stood for event? What if it stood for excellence? Wouldn't that be exciting? Email doesn't have to be email. Does that make sense? Go to mysummerlair.com/subscribe to sign up for the weekly pop culture My Pal Sammy newsletter. You will be elated you did.
Thanks for listening to me in a Netflix world. Leafs, yo.